Hello and welcome to Two Guys Discussing Software. This is our 13th episode and this is going to discuss today the future of the mega vendors, our favourite topic.
And it's two Irish guys, Tomás, just to keep reminding you of that.
Thank you. That's right, Brendan. Thank you very much. Yes, two Irish guys. How could I forget? Even the accents, how could anyone else forget as well? If you haven't heard us before, we do this podcast every month. We like to talk about everything in the software world. Particularly, we like to talk about the mega vendors. My name is Tomás O'Leary. I'm the CEO and founder of Origina, and I'm delighted, as the voice you just heard there is Brendan Walsh, my very, very good friend and colleague here at Origina. He's our Chief Commercial Officer by title, but he's a pal, ultimately. How are you, Brendan?
Yeah, I'm good, and thanks for the very kind introduction. Yeah, I'm
anytime.
Good. I'm looking out at a beautiful day here in Dublin. Still stuck in my house, not travelling to the office yet, but it's a stunning day, so I'm looking forward to getting out later on.
Yeah, we don't get to see enough of each other. It's this socially distant world we live in. I think there's some movement happening, and our guest later is really going to help us. We've been delighted to be joined by David Houle in about 10 or 15 minutes' time. David is a author, speaker, but ultimately he's a futurist. And David wrote a fantastic book called Entering the Shift Age, and actually had an opening question. Do you feel anxious about the future? So I think actually all of us will answer that question in the affirmative at this point in time. But we're delighted to have David join us later, particularly helping us try and predict what might happen to these mega vendors. David has obviously been a Speaker of the Year for Visted International, one of the leading CEO organizations, grouping organizations in the world, actually. Massive organization. And he is well known in media and many other sources. And I've seen him speak on a number of occasions and know him for quite some time. So really delighted that David could join us, and we'll be speaking to him shortly. But Brendan, we have to start always with obviously mega vendors, but there's always one organization that we just have to have a conversation, that the IBM company, corporation. We just need to start at them. They're great for news, aren't they?
Oh yeah, they're like the present that keeps on giving when it comes to IBM. There's always a good news story, depending on your take on it. But yeah, so they've been in the news again. I mean, I think we talked last quarter about their quarterly results. We saw that the results were down at that time about 3.4% over 2019. Which in itself down 4.7% over 2018. So just to put that in context of numbers people can get their head around, that represents about 1.44 billion in reduced revenue just for the quarters, not for the year, over that period. So that's a big drop in revenue. But much like when Ginny Rometty was around, she used to reward herself, or the remuneration committee used to give her lots of bonuses for
well deserved, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think in 2020 or 2019, I think surprisingly she got a $20 million package, but she did grow the revenue by 0.1%. So fair play to her for that. Missed all their targets, missed all of IBM's own targets. But I think you might recall from our previous podcast that she was noted for her responsible approach to artificial intelligence. So that's worth 20 million. To me,
all by itself, I'm sure.
So, but I'd love that remuneration committee. We might set one up ourselves at Origina, because it sounds like a fantastic thing to have, a wonderful thing to have. But on the back of those results, anyway, IBM announced that it was boosting its dividend, and it boosted it by 1 cent to $1.63 a share. And so an increase of a penny, which was called a boost, by the way. And remarkably, it's the 25th year in a row that they've boosted their quarterly dividend. And they haven't failed to pay a dividend since 1916, the year of the rising here in Ireland. So they're pretty consistent in paying themselves a dividend. And it equates to, actually, it also this quarter, finally, it equated to 1.4 billion in returns to shareholders, which was the same amount of free cash flow that they generated in the quarter. So free cash flow was generated 1.4 billion, but they paid that all out.
Well, I guess, as a shareholder of IBM, then, if you're getting stung on the share price because it's really gone nowhere near where the market's been going over the last couple of years, but at least you're getting a dividend. So that's a good sign. Good sign. Yeah. I saw they had their Think. Well, they were supposed to have it in San Francisco in the Marconi Center, but they had it online. They had was it 90,000 people turn up? Quite a turnout for their online. That's pretty impressive, to be fair.
Yeah.
You know, credit where credit's due. But I thought I read some of the headlines from it. They stayed away from all the software products. They're really pushing the AI piece. They're pushing Red Hat, of course, open source software, 5G even. What's the role of 5G? I'm not sure yet. And cloud. But their traditional products, as we saw last year in 2019, they sold off 3 lots of software to 3 different companies. And really the future for their traditional perpetually licensed software is probably pretty bleak, I would imagine, given the fact that it's not even raised. So their traditional WebSphere products or DB2 or any of those products are really not getting a look in. And speaking of money, you spoke the 20 million that Ginny Rometty, but she's not really even close to some of the richest people in the world. I saw since the outbreak, there's people who's tracking some of these numbers, and I know you love your numbers. So I decided I'd get my hands on some of my own for a change.
Oh, I know you would.
So we're looking at likes of Jeff Bezos up 30 billion roughly dollars in the period. Steve Ballmer up 5 billion. This is like increases, not total net worth. Larry Ellison, a miserly $670 million only. That's very sad.
Poor Larry.
Yeah, and poor old Bill Gates has been on the news a lot, getting a lot of stick for his pushing the virus out, or not the virus, apologies, a cure for the virus, and he's getting a lot of stick out there.
Oh yeah, he has a patent on the virus, apparently. Yeah.
I don't know what he has, but he's obviously a lot of conspiracy theories about poor old Bill. He's lost $9 billion. Larry Page and Sergey Brin have also down money. So it's a bit of a mixed bag for the software world over the last while. And I see also there's been a lot of talk about influence. You know, we see this in Europe a lot. There's been a number of rows between. There was an online row between Mark Zuckerberg and one of the new tech chiefs in the European Union, a guy called Thierry Breton. They had an online conversation, and they had a bit of a ding dong over, Facebook's kind of rights to manage their data better. I'm not sure if you saw as well, Brendan, it was actually a new law in France only in the last week, 10 days. They pushed a bill through, and they're forcing the large web companies and online companies to take down hate speech for the first time. Now, this is a new law. Now, it's only in France at the moment, but there's a good chance, like these laws have tended to go across Europe. And in time, as you're even seeing with the likes of GDPR and even the right to be forgotten element of that, there's certain elements of that starting to creep into some of the more liberal states in the US, like California and others. And you may see, if there is a change in politics in the United States, that's happening more and more. So, and they're the two, I guess to be honest with you, it's European Union and the US that really make all the rules here.
I saw that.
But yeah, look at those numbers. Yeah, so
it's a pretty punitive challenge. Like it says, I think they have to take down hate speech and speech around terrorism within an hour of it going up. So that's a tough ask, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think it's with 24 hours in total, I think it is. And but the penalty is 4% of global revenue. Yeah. That's a lot of money for some of these guys in per penalty, 4%. So yeah, we'll see where that goes. So yeah, numbers. Any other numbers, Bren?
Well, I suppose on a good news note, and it's hard to find bad news about Microsoft. I know we try and find about lots of the other guys like our Larry, etc. We'll talk about him shortly. And I think this is something that's going to come up. We're going to talk to David about it, about what's going to happen with the mega vendors and the projection. But they seem to be hanging in there, some of them. The NASDAQ had gone down, immediately after the outbreak, and it's gone back up again, not to pre-COVID-19 levels, but it's certainly it's certainly increased, and it's obviously dominated by tech companies. And one of those tech companies is Microsoft, which had growth of 15% over the period, and that's pretty substantial. So I think it's a $5 billion increase in quarterly revenue over the same period last year.
Is that just since the beginning of the year?
Well, that's their Q3 results, yeah. So,
yeah, wow.
But they're quarter on quarter, yeah. So like increased by 15%. It was 30 billion odd in the quarter last year, and it's up to 35 billion. And obviously, a lot of that has been attributed to the cloud. I think, as we know, and it may come up in conversation later on around, that their team communication app is now over 75 million daily active users. And, impressively, that's up 44 million since the start of March. So that kind of gives an indication of what's happening. People working from home. We'll talk a little bit that, I'm sure, with David about what the future holds for people. And nearly 40 million subscribers to Office 365, which is up 16%. So yeah, things are looking good. And like Alphabet and Facebook posted positive results as well. Microsoft shares are up 12% of the year, whereas the S&P 500 is down 9%. So the tech stocks look like they're holding their own. Maybe not IBM, but all the other tech stocks seem to be beating the trend and beating the market.
Yeah, but the market is not really, Wall Street's not following Main Street yet, so we wait and see what happens there. I mean, I think we look forward to chatting to David about that. And you mentioned Microsoft and you mentioned Satya Nadella. We really struggle to find anything bad to say about the guy. And to be fair, with all those results, and that's a seriously impressive increase, 15% for a company of their size. That is huge. But he's gone out recently and he's been telling people actually, we all saw Jack Dorsey saying everybody can work from home forever. We've had Facebook and Alphabet, obviously Google, coming out saying the same thing at least to the end of the year. He's actually come out, even though they've done really well on the back of this, he's come out and said, actually, it's not such a good idea. That's an interesting take. And it doesn't sound like marketing spin. It sounds like genuinely coming from the heart. So, I mean, I think one of the quotes he said, he was like, this remote working setup would be replacing one dogma with another dogma. So given what Microsoft have done in terms of driving the dogma of software over a long, long time, I think he's certainly making the right noises in terms of making friends in that world. But that whole online working is, between themselves and Zoom and all the other platforms, it's driven huge. I mean, I think Zoom have doubled their share values, more than doubled since the crisis started. Isn't that right?
Yeah. We picked up on Zoom on our last podcast as well. To Thatcher's point, I suppose, everything can go online. There could be, and we read some articles about this, you could have, teleschooling and telemedicine and, you'd be stuck in your home with entertainment and you'd never get out. But that can't be healthy for society. So I'm not sure where that's all going to end up. But Zoom are certainly doing very well. I mean, the lad podcast, we saw that Larry Ellison, we love Larry, had surprisingly said that he determined Zoom to be an essential service for their business. Now, it's unlike Larry to be talking up other software companies, and we thought maybe he was doing that because he doesn't like Microsoft, so he's trying to talk up one of their competitors, which is Zoom. And so we thought, well, that must be it. But actually, no, that's not it. I think we dug a little bit deeper and we found out, well, actually, that Zoom had picked Oracle over AWS and Azure for its expansion plans for its platform.
Okay.
So they're benefiting to the tune of, we don't know how much per month, for the 217,000 terabytes of data that's now flowing through Zoom each month. So we dug a little bit deeper, and there's lots of people writing about this, but it seems that if you were to get the retail price of Amazon, that 217,000 terabytes would actually cost you $11 million per month at retail prices. Now, I don't think you can go to your local store and buy it, but you know what I mean? You go online. Whereas Oracle was 10 times cheaper at just over $1 million, $1.1 million, before an advertised 30% discount that you can get, I think, by buying online. Like, if you buy your pizza online, you get a discount. So
what you're telling us then, that Larry's pitch was just your typical never lose an opportunity to make the pitch. What a sales guy. He's never lost it. I love it. Yeah. But listen, you were touching on it there, the share price increases, and the software industry has absolutely transformed since the last recession. And you wonder, do they think they're recession-proof? Looking at the software industry today as a spend across all asset classes, they're over 50% of technology spend in businesses today. I mean, you go back 20, 30 years ago, that would have been probably at best high single digit, maybe low double digit. I mean, it's massively everything is software today. I mean, software is absolutely everywhere. You fall over software. I mean, you walk into your house, there's software in it. And I mean, everything that was hardware is now software. So we're seeing a huge, huge move. It's as if, though, they feel as if they're future-proofed here.
Yeah, well, it's the second highest spend category, I think, from a recent article I read to personnel. So yeah, it is everywhere, and it's not probably managed as well as it should be. So there's lots of software that's out there that's probably been paid for and not being used. But I think, yeah, since the last recession, a lot has changed. There was a lot more on-prem software 10, 12 years ago than there is today. 2007, 2008, everybody was still buying on-premise, software for ERP, etc. That's all shifting to the cloud. So it'll be interesting to see how recession-proof that becomes, particularly in the face of mass unemployment in all jurisdictions. But the biggest market in the world for software, the US, unemployment is at 30%. So will that cause them to be less recession-proof? I guess time will tell.
Yeah, there's a podcast I follow, actually, Track Change as it's called, guys out of the northeast of US, and they've talked about software eating the world. I think that's a very apt expression. There's actually a buddy of mine, John Reimer at Forrester Research. Actually, I don't know if you know John. He's been talking about actually what's going to happen coming out of this. His prediction is that you're going to see all types of companies now moving very quickly away from innovation and growth. It'll all be about initially certainly cost and optimization of costs is really where it's going to be at. And I think the companies that are able to adapt to that as quickly as possible, that'll be the ones that really will survive, on the assumption that they have a market. I think this is really a good time, I think, to bring David Houle in. Before I introduce David, just introduce David really quickly. Again, David is one of the most renowned futurists out there. He's a trusted advisor to over 2,500 CEOs and an author of many, many books, a lecturer even to actually one of our team here in Ireland who was studied in the US, believe it or not, David. We found out after we spoke to you recently. So, David, how are you?
I'm great. Glad to be on. I've enjoyed listening to you. I've been learning a lot.
I doubt it, but certainly, hopefully, you had some fun listening in there. Where are you at the moment?
I'm in Sarasota, Florida, where it's a lovely 85 degree. Well, we'll be shortly 85 degrees Fahrenheit. So, 25 degrees Celsius, I guess.
We're not far behind you. We're at 65 or thereabouts in round numbers.
65 in Dublin is like 85 in Florida. Yeah, right.
It feels like that here where we are today. It's great to have the good weather. At least it's keeping us. It's the one of the few things keeping a smile on our face. You've been listening to the conversation and the last topic. We'd love to get your thoughts on that. And I think I mentioned at the top of the podcast, you wrote a piece in your book, Entering the Shift Age, about do you feel anxious about the future? I'm wondering, are the software companies feeling anxious about the future? I mean, we're all feeling anxious about the future. But last time around, software companies came out and they really wiped the floor. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, let me ask you a question about that, because I was listening to you talk about that. Did they wipe the floor in part because employment went down and there was a substitution of software for people?
Well, they went, I think a couple of things happened, to be perfectly honest with you. I think there's been a massive shift in technology from, I think we mentioned there earlier, myself and Brendan, from hardware devices to software. So some of that spend, there's been a natural growth in obviously all IT. And what happens is, that's what in my skeptical mind says, companies that were selling what they would refer to as tin with some software on the side, and the software would have been a small percentage, let's call it a mid-single digits percentage of the total tin cost. They've actually started to put more software in, to be fair, but actually the percentage of that value has changed. So in other words, that same tin at 100% was the product, 95% was hardware, 5% was software. Now they're selling the same sort of similar products or the next generation, and it's almost 50-50 or 60-40, depending on the split. And that's had an impact for sure, because we've recategorized some spend. I think it's also been driven a lot by the fact that they can control user rights, or they feel they can control user rights if they have access to the software and ownership of the software. And ownership of software is less clear. Do you not think so? I don't know whether you agree with that.
Yeah, no, there's several things to talk about here. Relative to ownership, I think you've heard me talk about the fact that in all the developed countries of the world, certainly in the United States, it's starting in real estate, and moving to content, we are no longer a ownership economy. We're a rental economy or an access economy. I mean, on the consumer level, we don't buy CDs. We stream from Spotify. We don't buy DVDs. We watch Netflix. And that same value is going to permeate through all levels of the economy. In other words, I don't need to buy. I just need to rent. And even Mercedes, BMW, and Audi, you can now rent a brand new car. And you can rent used cars at a lower cost than the depreciation of buying a new car for the first year. So anything that is you got to buy, it's going to swim upstream, I think, over the next few years. I think it's I need it when I need it at the lowest cost possible, and I don't want to have to put any money down on it. So, I mean, I think that's the way it's going to be in corporate America. And I think globally, the access is going to, particularly now that we've entered a recession, beyond that, a depression, right? I don't know what the UK is going to be, but certainly the United States is in a depression. The only relevant numbers to what we're seeing today is the 1930s. So when you're going to enter into depression, you have to say, okay, so what is it people are not going to have? They're not going to have money in the bank. They're not going to have security. They're going to have a high sense of anxiety about what everything is going to end up being. So any prominent CEO is going to hoard cash and look at costs until they have a better idea of what's going forward.
And who will be hit hardest by that?
Well, I think I can't think of a business sector that's not going to be hit hard. But in terms, and I don't know. Like, for example, one of the cataclysmic businesses to be in is the commercial real estate business going forward. There's no question about that. Physical retail is going to continue to collapse. And I don't know what the numbers are. You guys may have a feel for it. But if you I've been using, say, 80 million people in the United States, so double that to take into Europe. So there's 150, 160 million people who never had to work from home before. And there are employers that employ those people that have had the people come into the office. So now that, I work from home, I think you work from home to some degree because you travel a lot. And the point is that whenever a new behavior has taken root, it always takes some of it. So if you have 150 million people, maybe 10 million of whom have worked from home, and so you got 140 million people, out of that 140 million people, probably 10, 20, 30, 40 million go, oh, this is great, right? And the owners are going to go, why do I need to rent the downtown Dublin, the downtown Tampa, the downtown New York office space when they could work from home? I mean, I think what Jack Dorsey said was really profound. And I do think where there's unemployment, what we've learned from and there's far more unemployment today than any time since the 30s, right? I mean, the United States is at 30% unemployment. It never got past 12% unemployment in the Great Recession. So it's 2.5 times that. So when that happens, I think mobility increases because people, either need to move to where the jobs are, or in the absence of jobs, they need to work from where they are. So one other thing I want to make before I forget about it is you used the word innovation, and I've written this book and I talked about how the 2020 is going to be the most disruptive decade in human history. So I really want tech people to stop using the word innovate or innovation. It's a 1990s word. We're in a disruptive time. We're in a transformational time. So innovation is nothing more than iterative change. I always like to say to audiences, I simplify it, I go, if Steve Jobs was an innovator, instead of the iPhone we would have gotten a BlackBerry with a bigger screen. Instead, he was a disruptor, right? I mean, that would have been innovation right now, because go back to 2005, 2006, we all had BlackBerries, right?
Yeah.
And, it was half the thing and it was a keyboard, right? It would have been a bigger screen. Instead, he had a completely disruptive product. So the point is, in an age of disruption, innovation, if everybody says, oh, we provide innovative solutions, I go to your conference too, we provide innovative solutions too. If everybody's providing innovation solutions, there's no innovations. Like if everybody says awesome, or the Brits say brilliant all the time, nothing's brilliant because everything's brilliant, right? So innovation is a dead word. Please stop using it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, no, it is. It's the space for disruption, and I always like to look back a little bit to see can we look forward, and I look
Sure.
at what happened after the last recession in 2000, the financial crisis of 2008, and after that, I mean, the software industry, broad strokes, but the business software is probably worth about $400 billion or just shy of that. It's now over $800 billion. One of the tricks that some of the big software vendors started to use increasingly more post 2008 was audits. So they actually they really increased their audit activity. I'm not sure how familiar you are with this. This is where companies are using more software than they should are licensed to use. And originally this started out as a kind of obviously clearly you shouldn't be using any more than you're entitled to use. But it became actually a little bit sneakier than that. It became, well, the software vendors realized the companies hadn't read their terms and conditions, or the fact that they've changed them 10 times in the last 6 years, and were able to catch them out. All right. So it became a business. And actually, there are estimates that this could be worth, of the 800 billion plus, about 200 billion of that spend. So things like that was basically when people stopped buying their software, that they were forced to buy software. I just don't think, because we bounced out of it and the money was so readily available, and particularly in the very big corporations where most of the spend is anyway, those companies have had a lot of cash, and very cheap cash, for quite some time. That's not going to be available, is it? And that is innovation. That's not what you describe as an invention in the way you described earlier.
Yeah, no, in fact, I'm writing a column now that I'm going to put up in Medium, in this new magazine I started there. And basically, the working title is, it's not when the economy bounces back, it's how it will bounce forward. So if you think of, that Warren Buffett always had the phrase that if you invest and there's a high tide, when the tide goes out, you see who's naked, right? So think of that in terms of COVID-19. What COVID-19 has shown the UK, it's shown all the developed countries of the world that we have fragile systems. We have out-of-date constructs. We have no longer valid institutions. And we have no longer valid functional high-speed democracies. And so the reinvention of capitalism and the reinvention of democracy are two of the things that are going to happen in the 2020s. So, when you talk about capturing and people not reading terms, it's survival of the strongest. You're talking about big vendors, right? So they think of themselves as big and fit. So survival of the fittest and survival of the strongest is going to be an outdated business model. And those that will survive, adapt, and flourish over the next 5 years are going to be those that are more adaptive and resilient. So what we've seen in the capitalist economies that are in a state of collapse, there's no resilience, there's no adaptability, right? So, and the other thing is, I think any software company that decides to take advantage of their clients is a short-term gain and a truly long-term loss, because there are so many people that are wondering if they're going to have a business, if they're going to have employees, if they're going to have a job, if they're going to be able to update, if that anybody that comes across as, I'm taking advantage of you in this time of pandemic, are going to be long-term losers. Yeah. So, I mean, I think to me that the people in the software business want to double down on, how do we make the current economy, how do we make software the salvation, the solution, the partner of figuring out the next reality, the next construct. So,
yeah, but isn't there a possibility here, David, that what will happen is, if you look at the Irish economy in relation to the business structure we have, we've got overseas capital investment mostly from the US. We've got, but half the businesses or half the employment is created by the small companies that employ less than 50 people, and they're the ones that are suffering right now. And what we've seen in the US is that the rich are getting richer. I mean, the Amazon, Microsoft, etc., they're all flourishing at the moment because more of their technology has been used, because Amazon is using its technology to enhance the consumer experience, and it's got a supply chain kind of locked down. And Microsoft is because people are working from home, it's benefiting. So is there actually, what do you see what might be happening is that this divide between the haves and the have-nots, particularly when you look at the mega vendors, that it's potentially getting bigger. As Tomás was, talking about earlier, I think the top 600, billionaires in the US have added on 400 billion to their wealth since the start of the year, and a lot of those are the top 10 of those are probably the mega software vendors. So do you see actually the shift, this divide getting bigger, and actually the mega vendors making hay during a crisis while everybody's suffering? Is that something you see happening?
No, I do not. I mean, there's going to be that attempt, but it's a long-term failure. You're within the construct or the self-isolation of tech. So, you made a comment that it's the smaller companies that are suffering. Let me just suggest the airlines, which are running at 5% occupancy now. And let me suggest car manufacturers that have, I haven't seen current statistics, but the average cost of a used car in the month of March in the United States went down by 15%. So you're going to have deflation at the consumer level, right? And if you have deflation and you're living through deflation, the way that only way the big companies will grow is if they discount their prices. So market share can happen, but if it's perceived to happen as a taking advantage of rather than a helpful, it'll be counterproductive. I mean, Tomás, you talked about taking on a lot of low interest loans. Just think of the airlines industry and the automotive industry. Most of the big traditional industries have bonds at junk bond levels, right? So the interesting thing is, I think one of the reasons the stock market's going up is the stocks you've mentioned. I mean, you got Amazon, you got Facebook, you got Google, you got Apple, and they're disproportionate. I think they're 20% of the value of the Fortune 500, right? I mean, S&P 500. So that's keeping it up. If you were to take out those 5 or 6 FANG stocks, the indices would be way down. So, I think what this is going to be is, I mentioned to you before we started that I've been saying for 2 or 3 years that the future corporations will have fewer people, much more technology, and much more training. So to your point, if software is 50% of the tech spend, that will probably go up to the degree that it replaces humans and also provides really robust training for the corporate clients.
And if you were to be sitting in front of the CEO of IBM or SAP or Oracle, the ones that are, I'll take Microsoft out of it because they seem to be a little bit better, certainly in our view, but say the mega vendor, more traditional ones who have probably treated their clients poorly in many cases, I'd say, listen, how that leap forward you talk about, that jump forward, how would you tell them? What would you say to them to look out for, the certain things that they should be doing?
Well, I think that customer support and customer service and the reputation, your corporate reputation around that needs to always be improved. Remember, we're going to reinvent democracy and reinvent capitalism in the 2020s. So reinvention, the historical term is creative destruction. So the big companies and the companies that represent the way business has done are most at risk of creative destruction. So IBM, I don't know their brand relative to hand-holding customer service, nice guys, but the big companies are the ones that are always at risk in a time of great upheaval because they've become big based on the old model, based on the legacy thinking of this was the model that works. So in a way, they're most at risk because they have the most to risk by change because they're successful based on the past model. Whereas a Facebook, the future of social media and stuff like that is going to be subscription going forward, but you can't displace Facebook. You can't displace Google. One of the interesting things that I ask you guys, because, one of the simple ways I'm looking at it is, you speak well of, Amazon is gargantuan. You speak well of Microsoft. So my sense is, in an oversimplified way, that the tech center, the quote Silicon Valley part of the United States, is moving from the Bay Area up to Seattle, right? Seattle seems to be having a renaissance with those two companies. Microsoft seems to be doing everything right, and Amazon has staked total ownership of retail, right? So, in a time of pandemic. So the question is, how will IBM adapt to whatever it is that is the new business model that they can't yet see. And I think smaller companies inherently are more adaptive and resilient. Larger companies are more hierarchical and structured. So, so I would push back. I think the bigger the company, the more at risk they are, certainly in the non-tech sector.
I certainly agree with you there. I think the more diversified they are as well. I think if you've got a very clear, the bigger the corporate, of course it does lots of things, but if it's really got the one or two things it does them really well. Even if you're very big, you can do that. The problem with some of the other companies, they do so many things. What really should happen now is they should be broken up. I've said this for a long time. I've said the likes of a corporation, for us, it's all a bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing, in a business sense, we compete with IBM, so we like to have a bit of a laugh. But actually, it's not really at the same time. It's quite serious. They really should. They should start to break the company up into its constituent parts, because they should have done this a long time ago. And then they would be able to deal with some of these challenges. They'd have nimbler management teams. They'd be able to adapt faster and have that resilience, as you described earlier, that's needed in like corporate resilience. It's not just the personal resilience that you have as individuals. And I love when you talk about that, because in our own company, we talk about it all the time. And I talk about all that all the time. As a corporation and a company, you have to have it too, as well as so it's made up of the culture and of the individuals.
But you also, the general thinking is think of somebody who works for a large corporation versus thinking of an entrepreneur, right? So, the cliche coming out of .com 1.0 is you need entrepreneurialism in the big corporation. Well, I don't know how well that has come in, right? So I think you're right, Tomás, that what have we seen? Coming into the 2000s, Jack Welch was considered the great CEO of America last quarter century less. And now he's totally denigrated because the whole concept of the conglomerate doesn't function now. Break it up and make each one more nimble. For example, I got on Instagram right at the time, right after Facebook bought it. And I think Instagram was great, but everyone's been on it for a while says, oh, Facebook has just messed it up, right? The uniqueness of it has been dampened down by corporate. So that's what corporations do. And that's counter to what's about to happen.
Yeah, I think so. I think I agree. And tell me, David, what are you working on at the moment? You have a new book coming out?
Yeah, I do. Thanks for asking. It's really funny that we're sitting here in May. So the book I'm coming out with is the first book of a series on the decade, the 2020s. The 2020s decade is going to have more change than 2 to 3 decades. It is the decade that will determine the rest of the way the story is written in this century, or at least for the next 50 years. So there's so much change coming. So I wrote, the first book is called The 2020s, the most disruptive decade in history. So sitting here on May 20th, I've been saying to people for the last couple of months, so how's the first part of the decade worked out for you, right? This is just an indication of how transformative it's going to be. People who are interested, you can go to the 2020sdecade.com and the 2020sdecade.com, and you can maybe put that up. But the book should be out next week, end of May. And the other thing is, and you've heard me speak, as you said in the introduction, I believe that this depression is going to last at least through 2022. And all conferences this year, as you know, have been going virtual. And I think people are hedging their bets for 2021. But I think it's going to happen. So I've moved my keynoting business rather than flying all around the world. I do virtual keynotes. We talked about that. And so the two things I'm working on is moving my business where I get paid. I'm an example, right? So 90% of my revenue came from getting on one or more planes to fly to a place, to be around people all the time, to go to a convention hall or a hotel bar and speak to a few hundred, a few thousand people. Well, that business model's gone. So how do I reinvent my business model? Well, I don't do Zoom. I do a higher end of live broadcast quality streaming to my corporate clients. So I'm working on moving that, and then also this book. And I hope to have Tomás, a book every 6 months come out, so that by the first half, by 2025, I would have 8 to 10 books out about this decade, because it's the age of intelligence, which you just touched on. It's the age of climate change, and it's the reinvention of democracy and capitalism. And then towards the end of the decade is this emerging new global consciousness that we kind of see in COVID, right? We've got this declaration of interdependence going on, regardless of what the politicians are doing. So I'm working on writing books about this decade and making my speeches online.
And I loved your book, The Spaceship Earth, that you wrote with Tim Rubbage. You talked about the limitations that there exist with resources and space, and the fact that actually maybe there's some good things that'll come out of this.
One of this column I'm writing is, the economy is going to come back, but we can't use GDP as a measurement, right? So the book I wrote last year, Moving to a Finite Earth Economy, says we have to move to conscious non-consumption. And so one of the big things that's going to come out of the COVID-19 depression, the first depression of the 21st century, is a collapse of consumption.
Yeah.
And the United States has 70% of its GDP as consumption. And so the point is that at the human level and at the corporate level, purchasing is going to go way down and renting is going to go way up. And people do not have money. And by extension, corporations can't expect to get paid the money they used to get. I mean, just think about the fact that there's 30% unemployed in the United States. The most that were unemployed in the Great Depression was 25%. So
yeah. They were slightly different times, though, weren't they? I mean, one was caused by poor policy decision making, and this is just a black swan event. Do you think this is going to have permanency, or do you think perhaps this is just temporary? If there was a vaccine in 6 months' time, do all the predictions change, or do you just see the world has changed forever, and the decades of change that you talked about is just being accelerated by this?
This is a symptom of the times. Mm. It's not a cause of the times. Mm. I mean, for 10, 12 years, people ask questions all the time after my talk. So what about a pandemic? And I says, there will be one. In fact, there'll be several. Just as we think we've solved COVID-19, something else is going to come up. So I think this is a practice. It's really a transformation from moving to how do we live in a time of pandemic and a time of climate change, to the fact that for the first time anywhere in the world, we all were inside, right? So for the first time since I was last in India in the 1970s, you could see the Himalayas from New Delhi. You could see clear water in the Venice canals. You could see sunlight coming in places there wasn't. 7 million people did not die in Europe alone just because of COVID-19, because they weren't breathing polluted air. So what COVID-19 has taught us is, as a species, we can collectively do something big, which is what we'll have to do to face climate change, which is what we'll have to do to adapt the whole work landscape to the age of intelligence. So, brilliant. COVID may have been a trigger, but it showed it showed me as an American that it's not about whether it's big or small government, but government is to be there when the people need it. And I think the examples pretty much around the world have been that the government wasn't ready to take care of the people. Yeah. And hopefully we'll end up with new measures and a fairer society at the end of it. I think that's a good point to leave it. David, listen, it's been fantastic and fascinating talking to you, as always. I wish you the best of luck with your upcoming book. As soon as it's out, we'll put that 2020decade.com link up on our website and our podcast. And we will be talking again very, very soon. Thank you very much, David. Right, thank you. My pleasure listening to you guys talk. I hope you get a lot of listeners. Take care. Have a great day. Brendan, so we're going to wrap up. It's been another interesting month. I hope to get to talk to you again next month. We're going to have a podcast next month again, sometime in the middle of June. I'm sure we'll be speaking before then, won't we? Well, I think we may be allowed out this week in groups of 4, as long as we meet outside. So you never know. We might meet up towards the end of the week. I'll have to check to see if that's okay. Very good. Listen, thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening, and thanks again to David Houle. Fascinating conversation, and look forward to talking to you in the future. Thank you.